Have you ever seen a ghost? Do they come back to haunt the living? I have seen the dead, seen them, and spoken to them. I went to library school back in the mid-'80s, attending the University of Western Ontario, Canada's party school. But there was no partying for us poor slugs stuck in the book stacks. Whenever I got too fed up with cataloging or indexing or citation analysis, I would grab my coat and my smokes and head out for the woods by the River Thames, the shallow river which ran through campus. One cloudy afternoon in late September, I was pounding down one of the trails through the woods. I was agitated by all the work I had to do, which is why I was goofing off. I had reached a stretch next to the river when I was confronted by a young woman who was soaking wet, completely drenched. Her sodden clothes had an ugly 1970s look: tan jacket, brown skirt, taupe pantyhose, taupe, sensible brown shoes, ugly 1970s earth tones. But the murky effect was offset by a pale pink see-through top, which made her look like she had been in a wet t-shirt contest. And she was certainly well endowed. Indeed, she was a very pretty young woman, but her pale, lovely face, framed by strands of wet black hair, made me involuntarily shudder. She looked just like a corpse. Still, I pulled myself together and asked the obvious. "Are you all right?" She just stared at me, her lips a blue, unsmiling line. "What happened to you?" I said, reaching out to touch her. I just wanted to comfort her, but she stepped away from me and began scurrying down the path. I was completely nonplussed, but then I noticed that she kept turning her head to look at me, as if she wanted me to follow her. And so I did. She led me along the trail to a place where a short bridge crossed the river. She went under the bridge and vanished. I walked under the bridge and came up on the other side, but she was gone, completely disappeared. I looked around a bit, then lit a fresh cigarette, shrugged, and made the long, dreary trudge back to school. That chick was sure spaced out, I said to myself, figuring I would never see her again. But I figured wrong, for I began to see her around campus, even around town, sometimes on rainy days, always on cloudy days. She was still completely soaked, drenched, as if she had been pulled from the river, but no one paid her any attention. And she was always looking at me, looking directly at me. Sometimes I even dreamt about her, and in my dreams I found myself following her along the trail by the Thames, and always ending up under the Richmond Street Bridge, where she always stopped and stood on the same spot, and then I would wake up. Was she trying to tell me something? If so, what? And who was she? One dark gray afternoon, I went to the Central Library downtown to work on an assignment, and was sitting at one of the old wooden study tables. This was back in 1984. I was sitting at one of the old wooden study tables when I saw a young woman standing by the filing cabinets containing the vertical/clipping files. Again, she was soaking wet, and again, no one was paying any attention to her. Nor was she dripping water upon the floor. And as I watched, she walked over to one of the filing cabinets, laid a hand upon the top drawer, the very top drawer, and faded away before my eyes. Naturally, I went over to the cabinet and opened the drawer. noting the lid was completely dry. Now, for the benefit of my younger listeners, in pre-internet days, a vertical file was a file folder full of pamphlets, newspaper clippings, and miscellaneous pieces of information on a particular topic. This one contained files on local murder cases, going back year by year to the early 1970s. I found her in the file for 1974. A young woman, a fellow student named Amanda Hazard, had disappeared and had never been found. I went to the microfilm reader and looked back through the back issues from the time of her disappearance, only to find the case had gradually petered out and was eventually forgotten. She had disappeared and had never been found. But still, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. That night, I dreamt of Amanda again. It was the middle of the night, pitch dark, but I was able to see her clearly, as she seemed to almost glow with a strange luminescence. We followed the same familiar path through the woods and along the edge of the Thames until we reached the Richmond Street Bridge. We went underneath, and she returned to her usual spot, turning to stare at me with eyes that beseeched me to what? And then she literally melted into the hard, pebble-strewn earth. Well, I'm slow, but I ain't that slow. The next day I made an anonymous call from a payphone in the student center, and later that day, Amanda Hazard, what was left of her, was finally found after 10 years. The post-mortem would eventually reveal that she had been strangled, then drowned, and that she had been pregnant. And that was the end of it, right? That's how these things always end in ghost lore or traditional ghost stories, right? Right? Nope. The next Saturday, I was walking through the downtown when I saw her again. Amanda stood at the busy corner of Richmond and Dundas, which was crowded with pedestrians, none of whom noticed her drenched, spectral figure. She pierced me with her icy stare, and I felt I had no choice but to follow. Amanda led me down Richmond to York Street, then to a rubby-dub bar across from the bus station. I stopped in the doorway. The place was an old-fashioned beer parlor, full of cigarette smoke, swirling to the strains of country and western music. Sitting at a corner table and staring at the empty glasses in front of him, sat a man who looked like he had come down in the world. He was wearing a Harris tweed jacket, but his cuffs were frayed, and his shoes needed a shine. Amanda stood in front of him. The man looked up and lurched immediately to his feet, knocking his chair over and staggering for the rear exit, ignoring the shouts of the waiters and the other rummies. Amanda followed him out. I followed her. The man scurried down York Street, charging down the sidewalk, crashing into pedestrians, some of whom he knocked over in his attempt to get away from Amanda. And as he ran, something extraordinary happened. He began to cry. "I did it! I did it! Make her go away! Make her go!" The man turned the corner onto Richmond, now shrieking, "I killed her! I killed her!" And then disaster struck. He tried to run across the road, darted into the street, and was hit by a bus. And Amanda disappeared. I joined the crowd which gathered on the sidewalk. The police were called, and after about 20 minutes, the ambulance finally appeared, and the injured man was taken away, to die from his injuries later that afternoon. I felt sick, as if I was going to pass out, and barely made it back to my little apartment, where I fell onto my bed and into unconsciousness. And that was that. I never saw Amanda again. Except... Did the man who was hit and killed by the bus murder Amanda? That was my guess, but I had no way to verify it, and no way of finding out. I knew the man's name, of course. But one dull, overcast afternoon, the next spring, I got into an argument with my girlfriend at the time. We were walking along a trail by the Thames, the same trail where I had first encountered Amanda. My girlfriend had turned to say something to me, and I found myself staring at her throat. Her throat. Her throat. And I thought how easy it would be for me to put my hands around her throat, and strangle her. And I had a sudden vision of Amanda and the man who had been killed by the bus. They were standing beneath the bridge on a dull, overcast day, and he was throttling her, forcing her to her knees, throttling. And then she went limp, and the man pushed her into the Thames, bending down and forcing her face under water. And then it was night, and the man was back under the bridge with a shovel, frantically digging a grave in the hard, rocky soil. And when it was finished, he took Amanda's corpse from the water and buried her in it. The vision faded, and I came back to the present to find my girlfriend demanding to know, "What's wrong with you today?" How could I tell her what I had just experienced? So I didn't try. But I now knew what had happened to Amanda, and that justice, of a kind, had been finally served. Why these things were shown to me, I will probably never know. That was many years ago now, and I haven't seen Amanda since. I've thought about visiting her grave and maybe putting some flowers on it in remembrance. But why tempt fate? So Amanda, if you're still out there and somehow hearing this, I'm sorry about what happened to you. But in future, let's just not meet. If this is your first visit to my channel, my name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring cryptids such as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and black-eyed children. I hope you will consider subscribing. Till midnight. Cheers.